Christmas Eve. For most people, it's magical. Glittering lights, warmth, hope, and joy. But for me, Christmas Eve is the time when the darkest, most terrifying moments of my life chose to reveal themselves. Today, I'm going to tell you 3 stories, 3 different Christmas Eves, 3 different horrors, and every word is true. Before I tell you the first one, there's something you need to understand. I'm 78 years old now, but on the Christmas nights I'm about to share with you, I was much younger. Life hadn't yet shown me just how cruel it can be, but it did, especially on those nights. If you enjoy chilling stories like these, make sure to subscribe. There's so much more I need to tell you. When this happened, I was only 19 years old. It was my first Christmas spent away from my family's home. I had married my husband, Robert, 3 months earlier, and we had moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. The house was old, built in the 1920s, with creaking floorboards and windows that rattled whenever the wind blew. But it was ours, and I loved our home. Robert worked the night shift at the steel mill, which meant I spent most nights alone in that house. At first, I didn't mind it. I was young, optimistic, and to be honest, a little naive about the world. But that Christmas Eve changed everything. Robert left for his shift around 6 p.m., gave me a goodbye kiss, and promised he would try to come home early on Christmas morning. Snow had been falling non-stop and heavily all day, thick white flakes covering everything like a perfect blanket. At 8 p.m., the power went out. Winter storms were common in our neighborhood, but I still felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. I lit candles all through the house, their flickering light casting long shadows across the walls. The silence was suffocating. No hum from the refrigerator, no soft static from the radio I usually kept on for company. Just the howling wind outside and the occasional creaks of the old house settling. While I was in the living room, wrapped in a blanket and trying to read a book by candlelight, I heard a noise coming from the basement. A soft thud, like something heavy being set down on the concrete floor. My first thought was that something had fallen. We kept our Christmas decorations down there, the boxes stacked haphazardly on metal shelves. Maybe one had tipped over. But then I heard it again. Thud, and again, thud. Those weren't the sounds of falling boxes. They were footsteps. If you were alone in that house, would you go check the basement or run? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Someone was in my basement. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat frozen, the book sliding from my lap onto the floor. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving across the basement floor. Then they stopped, right beneath where I was sitting. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear. It could have been seconds or minutes. time seemed to stretch and warp. Then I heard a new sound, the creak of the basement stairs. Someone was coming up. The basement door was in the kitchen, just around the corner from where I sat. I watched as the doorknob began to turn, illuminated by the candle I'd left on the kitchen table. It turned slowly, testing, as if whoever was on the other side wasn't sure if it was locked. It wasn't locked. I never locked it. Why would I? It was just the basement. The door began to open. Just a crack at first, then wider. I could see a hand on the door frame, pale and dirty, with long fingernails caked with something dark. Not a man's hand, too delicate, too small. A woman's hand. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who's there?" The door stopped moving. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a face appeared in the gap, and I felt my blood turn to ice. It was a woman, probably in her 40s, with matted gray hair hanging in greasy strands around her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and covered in dirt and grime. But it was her eyes that terrified me most. They were wild, unfocused, darting around the kitchen like an animal trapped in a cage. She was wearing what looked like a nightgown, torn and filthy, and her feet were bare despite the freezing temperature. "I'm cold," she whispered, her voice raspy and broken. "So cold." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. She pushed the door open wider and stepped into the kitchen. Up close, I could see she was trembling violently, her whole body shaking with cold or fear or something else entirely. She took a step toward me, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the linoleum floor. "I've been down there so long," she said, her eyes finally focusing on me. "In the dark, in the cold. Do you know how long I've been down there?" I shook my head, unable to find my voice. "Neither do I," she said, and laughed. It was a horrible sound, high-pitched and broken, like glass shattering. "But I'm so tired of being cold. So tired." She moved closer, and I could smell her now. A nauseating mixture of mold, decay, and something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. She reached out toward me with that dirty hand, and I finally found the strength to move. I bolted from the chair, knocking over a candle in my haste. It fell onto the rug, but I didn't stop to worry about fire. I ran to the front door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. Behind me, I heard her footsteps, slow and shuffling, but persistent. "Don't leave me in the cold," she called out. "Please, I just want to be warm." I flung the door open and ran barefoot into the snow, not even stopping to grab a coat. The cold hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't care. I ran to my neighbor's house 3 doors down, pounding on their door and screaming for help. Mr. Henderson opened the door, took one look at me, and immediately called the police. When they arrived 20 minutes later, I was wrapped in blankets, my feet numb, my whole body still trembling. I hadn't yet recovered from the shock of what had happened. 3 officers went to investigate. They found the basement door still open, the candle I had knocked over extinguished on its own, thankfully before it could start a fire. But they found something else. In the basement, behind the old furniture stacked in the far corner, hidden behind what turned out to be a false wall, they discovered a small space, almost like a tiny room. Someone had been living there. There was a filthy mattress, empty food containers, and scratch marks on the walls. Deep gouges in the concrete, as if someone had been trying to claw their way out. But the woman was gone. They searched the entire house, the yard, the neighborhood. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished into the snow. The police told me the house had a history. One of the families before us had a missing person, too. One night, the wife disappeared, leaving behind her husband and 2 children. Her body was never found. This was in 1954, 11 years before we moved in. I never spent another night in that house. Robert and I broke our lease and moved the very next day. I don't know if that woman in my basement was the one who disappeared, somehow surviving down there all those years. I don't know if she was a ghost or something else entirely. All I know is that every Christmas Eve, even now, 58 years later, I still hear that voice in my head. "Don't leave me in the cold, please. I just want to be warm." And I wonder if she's still down there, in that basement, waiting for someone else to find her, waiting to get warm. "13 years had passed since that awful Christmas Eve in Pittsburgh. I was 32 now, with 2 children of my own. My daughter Emma was 8, and my son Michael had just turned 6 that November. Robert and I had moved to a quiet suburb outside Boston, into a lovely 2-story colonial home with a white picket fence and a large oak tree in the front yard. It was everything I had once dreamed of as a young bride. By 1978, I had almost convinced myself that what happened in Pittsburgh had been nothing more than a nightmare, something my young mind had conjured during a power outage. Almost. But deep down, I knew better. And that Christmas would remind me that the world holds far darker things than most people care to believe. It was December 23rd, and the neighborhood was in full holiday spirit. Every house on our street was decorated with lights, wreaths, and inflatable Santas. Ours was no exception. Robert had spent the entire previous weekend hanging lights along the roof, and the kids and I had decorated the tree inside. The house was filled with the scent of pine needles, cinnamon, and the gingerbread cookies we had been baking all week. That evening, Robert had taken the kids to see The Nutcracker at the local theater. I had claimed I had a headache and stayed home, but the truth was, I just wanted a few hours of peace and quiet after all the preparations. The house felt different when it was empty, somehow more mine. I made myself a cup of tea, put on a few Bing Crosby Christmas records, and settled into the living room with a book. It was around 8 p.m. when I heard them. Voices outside, singing Christmas carols. I smiled and set my book aside. A group from the local church had come by the previous year. They had sung 3 songs. I had given them hot chocolate and cookies, and then they had moved on to the next house. It was charming, nostalgic, the kind of wholesome tradition I wanted my children to grow up with. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. There they were, standing at the end of our driveway. But something felt wrong. The group was much larger than I expected. Maybe 15 or 20 people, all wearing long, dark coats and holding candles. Their faces were hidden in shadow, and unlike most carolers, who usually sway and shift as they sing, they were standing perfectly still in a strangely rigid way. They were singing Silent Night, but something about it sounded off. The melody was right, but the harmony was wrong, dissonant, like someone was deliberately singing the wrong notes. It made my skin crawl. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, wrapping my cardigan tighter against the cold. "Hello," I called out, trying to sound friendly despite the unease creeping up my spine. "That's beautiful. Would you like some hot chocolate?" The singing stopped abruptly, all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, slowly, they all turned to face me, in perfect unison, like they were one organism instead of 20 separate people. I still couldn't see their faces clearly. The candlelight should have illuminated them, but instead, it seemed to make the shadows deeper, darker. One of them, standing in the front of the group, took a step forward. "We'd like to come inside," a voice said. "What would you do here? Invite them in, or shut the door immediately. I want to know your instinct." It was a woman's voice, but flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a script. "We're cold." Those words, "we're cold," they hit me like a punch to the gut, bringing back memories of that woman in my basement 13 years ago. My instinct screamed at me to go inside, lock the door, turn off all the lights, and hide. But I forced myself to stay calm. These were just carolers. Strange carolers, maybe, but just people. "I'll bring some hot chocolate out to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just give me a few minutes." "We'd prefer to come inside," the voice said again. The figure took another step forward, and now I could see her face in the porch light. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed too large for her face. She was smiling, but it was wrong. The smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. and it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, but I'm here alone," I said, taking a step backward. "My husband will be home soon, though. Maybe you could come back tomorrow?" The woman tilted her head to one side, studying me. "Your husband took the children to see the Nutcracker. He won't be home for at least another hour." "You're lying." My blood ran cold. How did she know that? I hadn't told anyone our plans for the evening. Even our closest neighbors didn't know. "Who are you?" I asked, my hand reaching behind me for the doorknob. The woman's smile grew wider. "We're carolers. We're spreading Christmas cheer. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what everyone wants?" Behind her, the rest of the group began to move. Not walking exactly. It was more like gliding, their feet not quite touching the ground. They were coming up the driveway, slowly but steadily, their candles held high. And now I could see their faces. Some were young, some old. Some looked completely normal, while others had features that seemed off, wrong in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Eyes too far apart, mouths too small, skin that looked waxy and artificial in the candlelight. "Stay back," I said, my voice rising. "I'm calling the police." "No, you're not," the woman said, and she was right. My phone was inside, on the kitchen counter. I'd have to go back into the house to reach it. And something told me that if I turned my back on these people, if I let them out of my sight for even a second, something terrible would happen. They were at the porch steps now. I could smell them, a strange mixture of earth and decay, and something chemical, like formaldehyde. The woman reached out and placed one foot on the bottom step. "We just want to come inside," she said softly. "We want to be part of your Christmas. We want to sit by your fire and sing songs and eat your cookies and be warm. Is that so much to ask?" "Yes," I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "Yes, it is. This is my home, my family's home, and you're not welcome here." The woman's smile finally faded. Her face went blank, empty, like a mannequin. "That's a shame," she said. "We were hoping you'd be more hospitable." The group began to sing again, but this time it wasn't Silent Night. I didn't recognize the melody, and the words weren't in English. They weren't in any language I'd ever heard. The sound of it made my head hurt, made my vision blur. I felt dizzy, nauseous, like I was going to pass out. I stumbled backward into the house and slammed the door shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. Through the window, I watched as they continued to stand there, singing that horrible song. The sound seemed to seep through the walls, through the glass, filling every corner of the house. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The operator answered, and I tried to explain what was happening, but I could barely form coherent sentences. "There are people outside my house. They won't leave. They're singing something. I don't know what it is, but something's wrong. Something's really wrong. The operator tried to calm me down, asked for my address, said she was sending a patrol car, but I could still hear them singing. And now I could hear other sounds too. Scratching at the windows, footsteps on the roof, someone trying the back door. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and stood in the center of the living room, turning in slow circles, trying to watch all the windows and doors at once. The singing was getting louder, more intense, building to some kind of crescendo. My head felt like it was going to split open. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Complete silence. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. No singing, no scratching, no footsteps. Just the ticking of the clock on the mantel and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I crept to the front window and looked out. They were gone. The driveway was empty, the street quiet. There was no sign they'd ever been there at all. No footprints in the snow, no candle wax, nothing. 5 minutes later, the police arrived. I met them at the door, still clutching the knife. 2 officers, both young men who looked at me with a mixture of concern and skepticism. I told them everything, and I could see in their eyes that they thought I was crazy, or drunk, or both. They searched the property anyway, walked around the entire house, checked all the doors and windows, shined their flashlights into the bushes and trees. They found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of any intruders. One of them suggested that maybe I'd fallen asleep and had a bad dream. The other asked if I'd been taking any medication. I wanted to scream at them, to make them understand that I wasn't crazy, that something had really happened. But I could see it was pointless. They gave me their card, told me to call if anything else happened, and left. Robert and the kids came home 20 minutes later, full of excitement about the ballet. I hugged them so tight that Emma complained I was squishing her. I didn't tell them what happened. What could I say? That a group of carol singers had terrified me? That they'd sung in some strange language and tried to get into our house? They'd think I was losing my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Robert, listening to him snore, staring at the ceiling. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Singing. That same horrible melody. Those same incomprehensible words. I got up and looked out the bedroom window. They were across the street, standing in front of the Johnsons' house. The same group, the same candles, the same unnatural stillness. I watched as Mrs. Johnson opened her front door. I watched as she smiled and invited them in. I watched as they filed into her house, one by one, until they'd all disappeared inside. The door closed. The house went dark. And I never saw Mrs. Johnson again. When I asked the other neighbors about her a few days later, they looked at me strangely. "Mrs. Johnson," they said, "no one by that name has ever lived in that house. It's been empty for years." But I had seen her. I had waved to her just the day before. She had 2 cats and a garden full of roses. I knew she was real. The house across the street stayed empty. Still does, as far as I know. Sometimes on Christmas Eve, I think about Mrs. Johnson. I think about those carolers, and I wonder how many houses they visit each year, how many people hear their song, how many are smart enough to keep their doors locked. I learned something that night, something important. When someone comes to your door on Christmas Eve, singing songs and asking to come inside, you need to look at them carefully. Really look at them. Because not everyone who comes calling during the holidays has goodwill and cheer in their hearts. Some of them are looking for something else entirely. And if you let them in, you might become part of their song forever. If this story made you double-check your windows tonight, hit like and subscribe. The third Christmas horror is even worse. I was 55 when this happened, 23 years after the carolers, 36 years after the woman in the basement. After all that time, after everything I had experienced, you'd think I would have learned to recognize the signs that something was wrong. You'd think I would have developed some kind of sixth sense for danger. But the truth is, evil doesn't always announce itself with singing or shadows. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in beautiful paper, tied with a bow. Robert had passed away 2 years earlier, taken from me without warning by a sudden heart attack. The children were grown and had families of their own. Emma lived in California with her husband and their 3 kids. Michael worked as an engineer in Texas. They called often and visited whenever they could. But I was alone in that house outside Boston, the same house where the carolers had come, the same house I should have left decades earlier, but never did. That Christmas, both of my children insisted that I spend the holiday with one of them. They didn't like the idea of me being alone, but I refused. I told them I was fine, that I had friends in the neighborhood, that I would keep myself busy with church activities and volunteer work. The truth was, I couldn't stand the thought of spending Christmas in someone else's home, even my own children's. I needed to be in my own space, with my own things, my own memories, even the painful ones. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. I had decorated the house, though not as extravagantly as I used to when the kids were young. A small tree in the living room, a few lights around the windows, a wreath on the door. Just enough to feel festive without overwhelming the place. I had made myself a nice dinner, roast chicken and vegetables, and settled in to watch. It's a Wonderful Life, a tradition Robert and I had kept for over 30 years. Watching it brought back memories of him. It made me both a little sad and strangely warm inside. I was halfway through the film when the doorbell rang. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m., far too late for visitors, especially on Christmas Eve. My first thought was that something had happened to one of my children, that someone was here to deliver bad news. My heart racing, I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A young woman was standing on my porch. She couldn't have been older than 25. Her long blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and she wore a bright smile on her face. She had on a red coat and was holding a large gift box wrapped with a golden bow. She looked completely harmless, completely normal. Not like the woman in the basement with her wild eyes and filthy nightgown. Not like the carolers with their wide smiles and impossible stillness. Just an ordinary young woman holding a Christmas present. I opened the door, but kept the chain lock in place. "Can I help you?" I asked. Her smile grew even wider. "Mrs. Palmer, Mrs. Eleanor Palmer?" I nodded slowly, wondering how she knew my name. "Perfect," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "I have a delivery for you, a Christmas gift from your daughter Emma." My daughter, that made sense. Emma probably sent a gift and arranged for it to be delivered as a surprise on Christmas Eve. I felt foolish for being so suspicious. She was just a courier, probably working for one of those boutique gift companies that was starting to become popular. I closed the door to unhook the chain, then opened it fully. The cold air rushed in, and I shivered. "That's so sweet of her," I said. "Would you like to come in for a moment? It's freezing out there." "Oh, no, I couldn't," the woman said, still smiling. "I have so many more deliveries to make tonight, but I do need you to sign for this." She held out a clipboard with a delivery form on it. I took the clipboard and glanced at it. The form looked official enough, with Emma's name and California address listed as the sender. I signed my name and handed it back to her. "And here's your gift," she said, handing me the large wrapped box. It was heavier than I expected, and I nearly dropped it. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Palmer." "Merry Christmas," I said, watching as she walked back on the driveway to a white van parked on the street. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the box in my arms, then went back inside and closed the door. I set the box on the coffee table and looked at it. The wrapping paper was beautiful, deep red with gold stars, and the bow was perfectly tied. There was a small card attached to it. I pulled it off and opened it. "To Mom, with all my love. I hope this brings you comfort this Christmas. Love, Emma." My eyes filled with tears. My sweet daughter, always thinking of me, always trying to take care of me, even from across the country. I wiped my eyes and carefully began to unwrap the present, not wanting to tear the beautiful paper. Inside was a plain cardboard box. I opened the flaps and looked inside. There was something wrapped in tissue paper, and beneath that, I could see what looked like fabric. I pulled out the tissue paper and gasped. It was a doll, but not just any doll. It was an antique porcelain doll, the kind that collectors pay thousands of dollars for. She was exquisite, with delicate features, real human hair styled in long curls, and a Victorian-era dress with intricate lace details. Her eyes were glass blue and startlingly realistic. She was beautiful. Does this doll feel creepy to you too? Or is it just me? Comment creepy if you felt it. But something about her made me uncomfortable. Maybe it was the way those glass eyes seemed to be looking at me. Maybe it was the slight smile on her porcelain lips. Too knowing, too aware. Or maybe it was just that I'd never been fond of dolls, even as a child. They'd always unnerved me with their blank stares and frozen expressions. Still, Emma had clearly spent a lot of money on this gift, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I set the doll on the mantel, propping her up against the wall so she wouldn't fall. She sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her glass eyes reflecting the light from the Christmas tree. I went back to my movie, but I kept glancing at the doll. There was something about her that I couldn't shake. After a while, I got up and turned her to face the wall. That was better. I didn't have to see those eyes watching me. I finished the movie and cleaned up my dinner dishes, then got ready for bed. It was almost midnight. I'd call Emma in the morning to thank her for the gift. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I felt a chill run through me. The house seemed colder than usual, despite the heat being on. I got into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, but I couldn't get warm. My feet felt like ice, and no matter how many blankets I piled on, the cold seemed to seep into my bones. I lay there for what felt like hours, shivering and unable to sleep. Then I heard it, a soft sound, like fabric rustling. It was coming from downstairs. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises, the heat expanding the pipes, the wood settling. Nothing to worry about. But the sound continued, rhythmic and deliberate. Rustle, 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 like someone moving around in the living room. I thought about the doll, about how I turned her to face the wall, about those glass eyes and that knowing smile. And I thought about the delivery woman, with her too bright smile and her clipboard and her white van. Something was wrong. I'd known it the moment I saw the doll, but I'd ignored my instincts. Again. After everything I'd been through, after all the warnings life had given me, I'd still opened my door to a stranger. I'd still accepted a gift without question. The rustling stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard a new sound. Footsteps. Slow, light footsteps on the stairs, coming up to the second floor, coming toward my bedroom. I wanted to move, to get up and lock my bedroom door, but I was paralyzed with fear. Just like I'd been in Pittsburgh when the woman came up from the basement. Just like I'd been when the carolers sang their horrible song. Fear had frozen me then, and it was freezing me now. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They paused for a moment, then continued down the hallway. Closer, closer. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could see the shadow under the door, blocking out the light from the hallway nightlight. Something was standing there, waiting. Then the doorknob began to turn. The door wasn't locked. I never locked my bedroom door. There was never any reason to. I lived alone. The door opened slowly, and in the dim light from the hallway, I saw her, the doll. But she was different now. She was life-sized, or nearly so, maybe 4 feet tall. She stood in the doorway, her Victorian dress rustling slightly, her glass eyes fixed on me, that slight smile still on her lips. She took a step into the room. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by an amateur puppeteer. But she was moving, walking toward my bed. "Mrs. Palmer," she said, and her voice was the same as the delivery woman's, bright and cheerful and completely wrong. "Did you like your gift?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She took another step closer. "Emma didn't send me, you know. Emma doesn't even know I exist. But I knew you'd open the door if you thought I was from your daughter. People always open the door for gifts, especially at Christmas." She was at the foot of my bed now. Up close, I could see the cracks in her porcelain face, the way her jaw didn't quite move right when she spoke. Her hair, which I'd thought was real, was actually made of some kind of synthetic fiber that caught the light in an oily way. "What do you want?" I finally managed to whisper. Her smile grew wider, and I heard a cracking sound as the porcelain of her face split slightly at the corners of her mouth. "I want what we all want, Mrs. Palmer. I want to be part of something. I want to belong. I want a family. And you're all alone in this big house. You have room for me." "No," I said, finding my voice. "No, you need to leave." "But I'm a gift," she said, tilting her head to one side. "You can't return a gift. That would be rude." She reached out with one porcelain hand and touched the blanket covering my feet. Her fingers were cold, so cold that I could feel it through all the layers of fabric. "You've been cold all night, haven't you? That's because of me. I make things cold. It's what I do. Everything I touch turns cold and stays cold forever." She climbed onto the bed, her movements still jerky and wrong. She crawled toward me, and I pressed myself back against the headboard, trying to get away from her, but there was nowhere to go. "The woman in your basement," she said conversationally, as if we were having tea instead of this nightmare. "The carolers across the street. Did you think those were random? Did you think you were just unlucky?" She was close enough now that I could smell her. Dust and mold and something chemical. "They were drawn to you, Mrs. Palmer, just like I was. Because you have something we want. You have warmth. You have life. You have a soul that burns so bright, we can see it from miles away. And we're so cold, all of us. We've been cold for so long. Her hand touched my ankle, and the cold shot up my leg like an electric shock. I screamed and kicked out, my foot connecting with her porcelain chest. She fell backward off the bed and hit the floor with a crash. I heard the sound of breaking porcelain. I jumped out of bed and ran for the door, not looking back. I could hear her behind me, the sound of porcelain scraping against the wooden floor as she tried to get up. I ran down the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I grabbed my car keys from the table by the door and ran outside into the freezing night, still in my nightgown and bare feet. I didn't care. I had to get away from that thing, from that house, from everything. I got in my car and started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked up at my bedroom window. She was there, standing perfectly still, her cracked porcelain face pressed against the glass, watching me leave. I drove to the nearest police station and tried to explain what had happened. They listened patiently, then called Emma in California to verify that she hadn't sent me any gift. Emma was confused and worried, insisting that she hadn't sent anything, and begging me to go to the hospital to get checked out. 2 officers went to my house to investigate. They found the wrapping paper and the box still on the coffee table. But there was no doll. No pieces of broken porcelain in my bedroom. No sign that anything unusual had happened at all. They found something else, though. In the box, under where the doll had been, there was a list. Names and addresses, written in neat handwriting. My name was on the list. So was Mrs. Johnson's, the neighbor who disappeared after letting the carolers in. And at the very top of the list, there was another name. The name of the woman who had disappeared from my rental house in Pittsburgh in 1954. The police told me it was probably just a prank. Kids messing around. But they couldn't explain the list. They couldn't explain how someone knew about Mrs. Johnson or about the woman from Pittsburgh. They couldn't explain any of it. I never went back to that house. I moved in with Emma in California the very next week. I left everything behind, all my furniture, all my memories, all the years I'd spent in that place. I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere warm, somewhere bright, somewhere surrounded by people I loved. That was 23 years ago. I'm 78 now, as I told you at the beginning. And I've spent these past 2 decades trying to make sense of what happened to me across those 3 Christmas nights. I've read books about the supernatural, consulted with priests and psychics, searched for answers in every place I could think of. And here's what I've learned. Some things in this world are drawn to certain people. Maybe it's something about our energy, or our past traumas, or just the way we're wired. But once they find you, they don't forget. They come back again and again in different forms, but always the same underneath. Always cold, always hungry, always wanting what you have. I also learned that the worst horrors don't come from monsters or ghosts or things that hide in the dark. The worst horrors come from our own choices, from opening doors we should keep locked, from accepting gifts we should refuse, from ignoring the voice inside that screams danger when we want so desperately to believe that everything is fine. That doll, wherever she is now, is probably sitting on someone else's mantle, waiting, watching with those glass eyes, looking for her next family. And somewhere, there's a group of carolers standing outside someone's door, singing their impossible song. And somewhere in a basement, a woman with wild eyes is waiting for someone to find her. They're still out there, all of them, and they're patient. They have all the time in the world. But I want you to understand something, and this is important. I'm not telling you these stories to frighten you, though I know they're frightening. I'm telling you these stories because I need you to be prepared. I need you to recognize the signs. I need you to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't explain why. Because here's the thing about Christmas. It's supposed to be a time of love and warmth and family. A time when we open our homes and our hearts to others. And that's beautiful. That's what makes us human. But it's also what makes us vulnerable. So when someone knocks on your door this Christmas Eve, look carefully before you answer. When someone offers you a gift, think about whether you really want to accept it. When you hear singing outside your window, listen to what they're really saying underneath the words. And if something feels wrong, if every instinct in your body is screaming at you to run, don't ignore it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't convince yourself you're being paranoid or silly or rude. Because I ignored my instincts 3 times. 3 different Christmas nights, 3 different encounters, and 3 times I nearly lost everything. I was lucky. I survived. But not everyone does. Mrs. Johnson didn't survive. The woman in the basement didn't survive. And there are others, so many others, whose names were on that list, who opened their doors or accepted their gifts or let the carolers inside. This Christmas, I'll be here in California with Emma and her family. We'll decorate the tree and bake cookies and watch movies and do all the things families do. And I'll be grateful for every moment of it. Grateful to be warm, to be safe, to be surrounded by people who love me. But I'll also be watching the windows for shadows that don't belong, listening for songs that shouldn't exist, checking every gift to make sure it's really from who it says it's from. Because Christmas might be the most wonderful time of the year, but for some of us, For those of us who've seen what hides behind the tinsel and the lights, it's also the most dangerous. So please, this Christmas, be careful, be aware, and whatever you do, don't let them in. No matter how cold they say they are, no matter how much they beg, no matter how convincing they seem, keep your doors locked, keep your family close. And if something doesn't feel right, trust that feeling. Because I'm 78 years old, and I've lived through things I shouldn't have survived. And the only reason I'm still here to tell you these stories is because eventually I learned to listen to that voice inside that knows when danger is near. I just wish I'd learned it sooner. Merry Christmas, stay safe. And remember, not every gift is meant to be opened. Not every song is meant to be heard. And not everyone who comes to your door on Christmas Eve has your best interests at heart. If you've stayed with me through all 3 stories, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.